Alright, are you all fired up and ready to roll for another edition of our TLW video series on FHIR presentations? And this is yet another DevDays presentation from 2024, and this time it's by Lloyd McKenzie. Now, Lloyd McKenzie is a well-experienced consultant and also participant in the HL7 space, HL7 version 3 and FHIR, and he has some words of wisdom to share. And he does that by basically going over 6 different laws or rules that you would have to basically adhere to when we're talking about successful interoperability projects. So, let's hear it from Lloyd.
It's a fundamental notion in interoperability. So be conservative in what you do, be liberal in what you accept from others. You want to send out instances that are compliant, but you want to allow some wiggle room when people are sending data to you. And if you follow this principle, you're going to be more interoperable than if you don't. A lot of people mistake the 80% rule for another common rule that also has 80% in it, which is the Pareto principle. 80% rule is not that. 80% rule is that we're only going to include things in the scope of a specification, so the core specification or certain implementation guides, that we believe that most systems have the capability of handling. And the rough number that we've picked there is 80%. The Pareto principle says that if 20% of the work will give you 80% of the benefit, and it turns out that that's actually related to the 80% rule, but it's a slightly different thing. So what does that mean in principle? If you look at this graph, it's on the left-hand side, it's what percentage of the requirements are you handling is none, all the way to 100%. And every implementer out there can absolutely manage to implement 0% of the requirements. So you're going to have 100% who can manage that. And then as you start asking to handle more and more and more, the number of implementing systems that can actually manage that is going to be less. And if you look at where the 80% is, it's roughly there. So you can get, say, 30-ish% of requirements. Most systems will be able to handle that. But we have that Pareto principle that says that most of the benefit comes from a small percentage, so roughly 20% of the effort gives you 80% of the benefit. And so if we take that as a graph, you get an awful lot of benefit from a relatively small amount of the data elements. And if we combine those two things, you get that red line. And what we're really looking for in interoperability is maximizing the overall benefit. If you aim for that sweet spot of those things that most systems can manage, not necessarily all of them are managing it right now, but most of them can, then you will get significant amount of benefit in terms of real change and real interoperability, because people will actually pick up the standard and do it. And the notion between fast, good, and cheap, pick 2, is that there's a trade-off in terms of what you can achieve within a particular set of resources for a project. The basics with this one is that there is a certain level of complexity that you cannot make go away. And you may also have heard Graham phrase it this way, which is you can move complexity around, but you can't make it disappear. And what this is really asking you to think about is if there is an innate level of complexity to the problem that you're trying to solve, and you do have an ability to move it, where should that complexity live? So Graham's assertion is that interoperability is primarily a people problem, not a technical problem. And what he's really trying to get at there is you can have the most elegant technical solution imaginable, But if you don't have consensus from the people that have to implement that solution, it's never going to happen. You really do need to have that buy-in. You need to have that agreement. You need to have people who actually want to interoperate. If they don't want to interoperate, you could give them a solution that is free, where you'll even pay them, and it won't happen. We've seen it. We've seen people invest tons and tons and tons of money in interoperability, and if the community didn't really want the data to flow, the data did not flow. So what that means is if your objective is interoperability, you need to focus on assembling the group of people, forming that consensus, providing support for the community to do the implementation, and actually get commitment to say, yes, the specification that we are all working on together, I have an intention to actually execute against it. In every project I've seen, the people side of it has always taken the bulk of the effort and the time. Wes's rule is, if you change the consensus group, you change the consensus. And what this really boils down to is, if you have a group of people in a room and they come to agreement and say, this is what the answer should be, but those people who are sitting in the room aren't the ones who actually need to agree to the decision to make interoperability happen, then you haven't really accomplished anything, because as soon as you bring in the bigger pool of people, they will say, well, that was a cool decision you made, but we don't agree, and then you have to start the process again. So when you are trying to make decisions about interoperability, it's vitally important that you have the stakeholders making the decision who are the stakeholders who actually have to have the buy-in to make the interoperability happen. So hopefully that's been useful to you. None of these things are magic, but they all influence our ability to achieve what we're looking for, which is to increase the amount of interoperability that we have in the world and increase the quality of patient care that we can get. Key messages that easy to throw out words of wisdom. There are all kinds of phrases that are out there, but you really need to dig into them to think about, how does it actually impact what I do? Most of them are really about taking a longer term perspective. So not just focusing on, I have this short-term deadline, but think about, where are you trying to actually move the world, and what is it going to take to get there? It is important to have the right group of stakeholders and to engage them early, and it's going to take time. Standards work is not a fast process, and that doesn't necessarily make us happy, unless you happen to love doing standards, in which case, yes, it should take a long time because I get to keep doing it. But it is going to take a while, because you do have to move the community rather than just moving the technology.
So now that you've seen these 6 laws or rules that apply to all interoperability projects, I certainly hope you agree with them. I certainly do, and as a trainer, I try to share similar principles in my training courses. But those were 6 rules, and if there were to be a 7th rule, then, well, I would say listen to Lloyd, right? But should you have a better idea as to 7th interoperability law, please share it with us in the link shown below. Thanks for watching again. See you next time.